From here, we're going to go into the next phase of how this takeover continued to move on without people knowing. And that always happens when you have a branch of your organization that is the media or the public relations branch. And that's what we're going to get into next. In order to explore the idea of fake news, just as with before, I'm going to have a whole lot of links for you. I'm going to give you a little brief synopsis of what these are all about, and then I'm going to leave you to your own devices to go look this up for yourself. The reason I want you to look it up for yourself is because you'll learn better that way. You shouldn't take my word for it. You shouldn't take anybody's word for what they're saying. You should be able to listen to information, decide if it's something valuable to you, and then follow the trail where it goes. You shouldn't come up with a predetermined answer on how something should be. You should follow to see where the information leads you, because it will lead you to the answer as opposed to some preconceived ideas, because that never, ever works. So we hear the term fake news a lot. President Trump has been discussing it since he first came down the escalator. But what exactly is fake news? What does that mean? Fake news. It means exactly what it says. Fake means it's not real. See, a news show, a news program is supposed to provide you with news, information about what is going on in the world. They should be able to take that information that they gain through observation, through participation, through hearing a story, and be able to relay that story to the world. However, what has taken place over many, many, many years is that this information is no longer put forth in an unbiased manner. And as a matter of fact, quite the opposite, it is put forward in a very agenda-driven manner. And when that happens, it no longer becomes news that people can trust. It now becomes information that becomes harmful. We've all heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out when it relates to a computer. Well, these things on the top of our shoulders here, inside our head, are computers. And when we feed these computers, our brains, with garbage, then we are going to be spitting out garbage. In order for us to make proper decisions in the world, we need to be able to have proper information. Bad information means we make bad decisions because we don't understand what it is we should be deciding accurately. And so there is the reason why news is so important. The news used to be a very important part of our society. They were called the fifth estate because they helped to really check what was going on in the institutions around us to keep them honest. Not the case anymore. Not the case anymore by a long shot. So one of the first places and times when we started having our news being influenced goes all the way back to 1921. That's nearly 100 years ago. So fake news didn't start when Donald Trump came down the escalator. Matter of fact, fake news didn't start when Barack Obama was in office. It didn't start when George Bush Jr. or even Sr. or Kennedy was in office. It started much, much further in the past than that, 1921. And that's when the Council on Foreign Relations took over. So let's take a little look right here. What it says, no secret that over the last 4 decades, mainstream media has been consolidated from dozens of competing companies to only 6. Hundreds of channels, websites, news outlets, newspapers, and magazines, making up 90% of all media, is controlled by very few people, giving Americans the illusion of choice. While 6 companies controlling most everything the Western world consumes in regard to media may sound a little sinister arrangement, the Swiss Propaganda Research Center has just released information that is even worse. The research group was able to tie all of these media companies to a single organization, and that is the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR. The CFR. And what we have here is a little graph that shows the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, and how they're connected to all of these media outlets. You know, you'll go ahead and you'll check out this link, and then you can look these up, enlarge these even better. But here's long lists of people from various, New York Daily News, Slate, Nation, you go on and on, Reuters, Financial Times, Politico, Bloomberg, Forbes, News Corp, Fox News, NBC, The Economist, Time, New York Times, Atlantic, Facebook, Alphabet, Google, NPR, PBS, USA Today, Daily Beast, Newsweek, Disney, ABC News, Time Warner, CNN, Washington Post. Okay, go on and on and on. So here we have a question is, why isn't the CFR in the history books? It's a good question. Hardly one person in 1,000 ever heard of the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations was formally established in Paris in 1919 along with its British counterpart, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Together they can trace their roots back to a secret organization founded and funded by Cecil Rhodes, who became famously wealthy by exploiting the people of South Africa. Rhodes is the father of apartheid. The Council on Foreign Relations was founded by a group of American and British imperialists and racists intent on ruling the world. Many of the American members were American intelligence officers that belonged to the first American intelligence agency called the Inquiry. Many of the British members were British intelligence agents. The Inquiry and its members, who included such notable Americans as Colonel Edward Mandell House, Walter Lippmann, Isaiah Bowman, and James Shotwell, wrote most of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. The CFR, RIIA, method of operation is simple. They control public opinion. They keep the identity of their group secret. They learn the likes and dislikes of influential people. They surround and manipulate them into acting in the best interest of the CFR. The Council of Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute of International Affairs are adept at using the media to create massive psycho-political operations used to manipulate public opinion. The psycho-political operations are often designed to create tensions between different groups of people. The object is to keep the world in a state of perpetual tension and warfare to maximize profits from CFR, RIIA, munition, medicine, media, energy, and food business. Here we have a story dealing with the Rockafeller Foundation. That's very influential and part of this. Says the Rockefeller Foundation was the principal source for funding public opinion and psychological warfare research between the late 30s and the early World War II. With limited government and corporate interest or support of propaganda-related studies, most of the money for such research came from this powerful organization that recognized the importance of ascertaining and steering public opinion in the immediate pre-war years. Here's a gentleman who you may not have heard of. His name is Albert Hadley Cantril. He was a Princeton University psychologist who expanded the scope of the field. Cantril made major contributions in psychology of propaganda, public opinion research, applications of psychology and psychological research to national policy, international understanding and communication, developmental psychology, psychology of social movements, measurement and scaling, humanistic psychology, the psychology of perception, and basic to all of them, the analysis of human behavior from the transactional point of view. His influence is felt in education, law, philosophy, politics, and psychiatry. Henry Cantril, Princeton psychologist, is a representative of most quantitative scholars of social influence who, while holding their political commitments close to the vest, nevertheless saw themselves clearly in the ranks of reformers loosely attached to the progressive movement. Okay, so as we continue our journey, we need to take a look at Nazi Germany now. Okay? Remember, this is a big, big puzzle. There's lots of pieces to this puzzle. We need to look at all the pieces so we see how they fit together. Now, Nazi Germany was using censorship and propaganda. We all know that. We can look back in history. We can read about what was going on. Here it says, Wednesday succeeded in ending democracy and turning Germany into a one-party dictatorship. The Nazis organized a massive propaganda campaign to win the loyalty and cooperation of Germans. The Nazi propaganda ministry, directed by Dr. Joseph Goebbels, took control over all forms of communication in Germany: newspapers, magazines, books, public meetings and rallies, art, music, movies, and radio viewpoints in a way threatening to Nazi beliefs, or the regimes were censored or eliminated from all media. During the spring of 1933, Nazi student organizations, professors, and librarians made up a long list of books they thought should not be read by Germans. Then on the night of May 10, 1933, Nazis raided libraries and bookstores across Germany. They marched by torchlight in the nighttime parade, sang chants, threw books into huge bonfires. On that night, more than 25,000 books were burned, some of the works of Jewish writers, including Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud. Most of the books were by non-Jewish writers, including such famous Americans as Jack London, Ernest Hemingway, and Sinclair Lewis, whose ideas the Nazis viewed as different from their own and therefore not to read. Okay, so we're seeing this kind of censorship here in America. We see people, organizations like the social networks. Facebook is censoring people. We see Twitter censors people all the time. We see newspapers are changing and censoring what people say. It's a big, big problem. So this whole propaganda machine that was going on in Germany was very significant. The reason it's significant to our story is because it says Operation Paperclip was the code name under which the U.S. intelligence and military services extricated scientists from Germany during and after the final stages of World War II. The project was originally called Operation Overcast and is sometimes also known as Operation Paperclip. So now we have these scientists, some of which were involved with these mind control techniques, are now here in America. Some of them merged with our current intelligence community at that time, which was the OSS, Office of Strategic Services. They became the CIA. Now, Truman was the one who was responsible for putting together the Central Intelligence Agency. Is there something that the way the CIA has been functioning that is casting a shadow over our historic position, and I feel that we need to correct it? President Harry S. Truman wrote these words in an op-ed for the Washington Post, December 22nd, 1963, entitled, Limit CIA Role to Intelligence. Okay, a lot more to this article, but the point being that Truman recognized that the CIA was out of control and they needed to be reined in because he understood that they were going to be a very big problem for our country. And this is where we have Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird was the CIA's plan of manipulating the media. Operation Mockingbird was a CIA program that enlisted more than 400 American journalists as well as journalists around the world to manipulate public opinion by spreading propaganda, or what we call today fake news. To this day, the Mockingbird media is alive and well. When you hear that term, it just means that they are just spitting the same phrases over and over. There's the idea of the 4 a.m. talking point, where at 4 a.m. the media gets their talking points and then they all talk about the same thing. Often reading the same script through the course of the day, reading word for word, and you can see these compilations online where you'll see 50 different news agencies across the country, news stations, where they're reading the news and they're all reading the same story. That's the same script because somebody is out there in a central position of authority, because we go back to understanding that there's 6 companies that control 98% of all the media that we have. Okay, so next up here's a video I would like you to watch. It's nearly 3 hours long. It's by Myron Fagan. It's a recording all about the history of the Illuminati. If you really want to understand what's going on, you need to listen to this. It's from the 60s, 1967, and Myron lays it all out, tells the whole story in great, great detail. Okay? If you really want to understand the history, I'm going to suggest that you watch that video. All right, here we have a letter from President Kennedy, and I just want to scroll down to the actual important part that we're going to look at here. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are as a people inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it, and there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that is in my control, and no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle consent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts that they deserve to know. But I do ask every publisher, every editor, and every newsman in the nation to re-examine his own standards, to recognize the nature of our country's peril. In time of war, the government and the press have customarily joined in an effort based largely on self-discipline to prevent unauthorized disclosure to the enemy. In time of clear and present danger, the courts have held that even the privileged rights of the First Amendment must yield to the public's need for national security. In 1977, there was a committee that was put on by Frank Church, a Democrat. At one point, the Democrats actually were concerned about the issues of Americans being spied on and the intelligence communities being rogue, being out of control. So there was a committee that took place, and Democratic hero, liberal hero, Carl Bernstein wrote a 25,000-word article about this. It's entitled "The CIA and the Media: How America's Most Powerful News Media Worked Hand in Glove with the Central Intelligence Agency and Why the Church Committee Covered It Up." In 1953, Joseph Alsop, then one of America's leading syndicated columnists, went to the Philippines to cover an election. He did not go because he was asked to do so by a syndicate. He did not go because he was asked to do by the papers that printed his column. He went at the request of the CIA. Alsop is one of more than 400 American journalists who in the past 25 years have secretly carried out assignments for the Central Intelligence Agency, according to documents on file at the CIA headquarters. Some of these journalists' relationships with the agency were tasked. Some were explicit. There was cooperation, accommodation, and overlap. Journalists provided a full range of clandestine services, from simple intelligence gathering to serving as go-betweens with spies in communist countries. Reporters shared their notebooks with the CIA. Editors shared their staffs. Some of the journalists were Pulitzer Prize winners, distinguished reporters who considered themselves ambassadors without portfolio for their country. Most were less exalted, foreign correspondents who found that their association with the agency helped their work, stringers and freelancers who were interested in the daring do of the spy business, as in filing articles in the smallest category, full-time CIA employees masquerading as journalists abroad. In many instances, CIA documents show journalists were engaged to perform tasks for the CIA with the consent of the managements of America's leading news organizations. In 1977, there were 400 journalists that were CIA agents. How many more do you think there are right now in 2020? We could probably think of a number of them. Just watch all the different networks. Pay attention to how many times you see somebody on that is a former analyst, a former CIA intelligence officer, a former FBI agent, someone who worked for the Pentagon. There seem to be a lot of them around the news agencies. You know why? Because they're censoring what it is that goes out to the public. They're telling a story. That is what they do. One of the other things that was revealed was the mind control program, MK Ultra. This was also revealed during these church committee hearings and during this time period of investigation. You need to watch this because you actually hear the media in these hearings talking about their involvement, talking about the importance of maintaining their secrecy and having to go behind closed doors to talk about such matters. Here's an article called "The CIA and the Media: 50 Facts the World Needs to Know." This article by Professor James Tracy, first published August 2015, is of particular relevance in relation to the fake news campaign directed against the alternative and independent media. It is a bitter irony the media cover up the CIA's covert support of Al-Qaeda and ISIS is instrumented by the CIA, which also oversees the mainstream media. Since the end of World War II, the CIA has been a major force in U.S. and foreign news media, exerting considerable influence over what the public sees, hears, and reads on a regular basis. CIA publicists and journalists alike will assert they have few, if any, relationships, yet they seldom acknowledge history of their intimate collaboration. Indicates a different story indeed, one that the media historians are reluctant to examine. George Bush Sr. was a very instrumental character in the influence of the CIA into Washington because he was the first president that was a CIA member. He was the CIA, he was the head of the CIA, it was all secretive, and then he became the president. And he brings in now the CIA into the office and all of the troubles that go along with it. So here it is all these years later, and we hear about the deep state's influence throughout the world. It's because it's evolved for 50, 60, 70 years. Countries that are out there in the world that are causing problems with America might not be the country themselves, but the deep state influence that is running the politicians behind the scenes. That is the problem. This deep state CIA media machine that is going. That's our problem. Now, this article here is entitled Deathbed Confessions. Photos support claims that George H. Sheriff Jr. is actually George Bush Sr. According to Otto Skorzynski, pictured is the Sheriff family and a few friends around 1938. Holding Mother Sheriff's hand at left is Martin Bormann. In front is Reinhard Gehlen. In the back is Joseph Mengele. And to his right is Skorzynski as a young man. At the center right, in a German Navy uniform, is George H. Sheriff Jr. and his father, George H. Sheriff Sr. Bormann became Hitler's second command. Reinhard Gehlen was the chief SS officer and assassin who was smuggled out of Germany under Operation Paperclip. Stunsky was Hitler's bodyguard and SS spy assassin who came to the U.S. after the war under Project Paperclip. Skorzynski and George H. Bush were instrumental in merging Nazi intelligence with the OSI to form the CIA with Wild Bill Donovan and Allen Dulles. These guys were also part of the CIA mind control experiments such as MK-Ultra. SS officer and physician Joseph Mengele, the notoriously sadistic angel of death of Auschwitz, escaped Germany to South America after the war. George H. Sheriff Jr. became the 41st President of the United States of George H.W. Bush, and George H. Sheriff Sr. was Nikola Tesla's trusted assistant. Okay, a lot more information about George Bush than you may have heard before. Read it, check it out, see what you think, because if that is true, then you don't know the real history, and maybe you should. Another article here, George Bush, H.W. Bush shaped history, but not the way we're told. In the coming days, the media will be filled with reminiscences and reviews of former President George H.W. Bush's storied life and political career, but most won't report, and few actually know the backstory of Bush's role in building an interlocking family, business, and intelligence network that charted the nation's course for decades. The work was secret and predated his known and very brief intelligence career by decades. Okay, this is a good article, has some good points in here about some of his secrets and things he was doing. Now, anybody who's spent some time studying, you know the lies he was involved with, the secret organizations he was involved with, so check that out. And then here's one other interesting piece here. Film declares Bush Sr. involved in the Kennedy assassination. Hankly's film Dark Legacy examines the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy in '63 and makes the claim that George Herbert Walker Bush was involved by examining the former president's CIA relationship and where and what he was doing at the time of the assassination. Hankey points out how Bush rose to the top in the CIA and was in Dallas at the time Kennedy was assassinated. According to documentation found in a letter from the FBI, Bush was once asked about this and observed there had been another CIA agent called George Bush in the CIA at the time. But Hankey declares the evidence concerning the former president is strong enough that it could be put to serious legal examination, and says this: if we could present this evidence to a jury in Texas, he would pay with his life. What if? What if it's true? What if George Bush Sr. was involved with the assassination of John F. Kennedy? Do you think we should find that important? Do you think we'd want to know that? Or should we just turn a blind eye because we're supposed to be paying attention to one political party or another? I think it's important that we know the truth. And if we have been bamboozled for a long time by all of these different characters, like George Bush Sr. and the many other like him, then I think we should know the truth because it will truly set us free. And of course, one question that should come to all of our minds is, how is it that the media is able to lie and get away with it? Shouldn't they be getting in trouble? You would think they would, except for one fact, that it's legal for them to lie to us. It says the newest version of the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, includes an amendment that would legalize the use of propaganda on the American public, reports Michael Hastings of BuzzFeed. The amendment, proposed by Mac Thornberry of Texas and Adam Smith of Washington and passed in the House last Friday afternoon, would effectively nullify the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948, which explicitly forbids information and psychological operations aimed at influencing U.S. Okay? That is why they're lying to us. That is why we have a media that is out of control to these days. Now, we can either accept everything the media says at face value and just turn a blind eye to everything that I was pointing out here, or we could really dig into all of this and understand that we have a problem. Saul Alinsky is an important person to the Democratic and liberal agenda. Hillary Clinton wrote a dissertation on him. Barack Obama studied with him. The philosophies, the 13 points of rules for radicals that he put forth, have been a philosophy that's been followed for quite some time. So I'm going to go over a couple of these points here so you can understand what they are. Consider them nothing more than plays in a playbook, like any sports team might have. And they just use these plays as they feel they are needed. Saul David Alinsky died 36 years before the election of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton's first attempt for the presidency. But many feverish screeds on social media, talk radio, and YouTube might have made one think he lurked behind these politicians like Rasputin, spoken of by many on the right as the servant of the devil, America's Joseph Goebbels, and the dangerous harbinger of insurrection. Alinsky developed a reputation for insidiousness that may exceed his influence, considerable though it might be. In 1971, Alinsky wrote Rules for Radicals. It was all about wanting to change the world. What follows is for those who want to change the world from what it is to what they want to believe it should be. He makes the comparison to the book The Prince, which was written by Machiavelli, saying that was written for the haves. And his book, Rules for Radicals, was written for the have-nots, how to take the power away from those who have it. So when we get into the 13 rules, these form simple plays. Know these, you know what the thoughts are behind them. The first one, power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. That sums up the crux of the liberal agenda, the Democratic agenda. If you listen how they bluster that they're going to do something really important, or they go on and on about how they have some power, and then people get afraid because they said something, and then they don't have the power at all. They do it a lot. It's an opportunity for them to be able to stretch the truth, hoping that people won't ask any questions to see behind the facade. So that's a very important one. Another important part of their rules is rule number 5. Ridicule is man's most potent weapon. It's the situation where you simply call someone a racist, a bigot, a homophobe, an Islamophobe, whatever it is, a xenophobe, whatever kind of names you can make up. You call them these names because it puts the person on the defensive. And once you do that, then you just keep the pressure on to, take care of that person's psychological well-being, and eventually have them doing what it is you'd like them to do. So it's a whole system of thoughts of how to break down a society. It's a system of thought that is, as I said, utilized quite a lot by the Democratic Party, despite what they may say to the contrary. So one of the problems we've had is the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood came into America specifically with the intent of tearing America apart. You have a part of the world where the people there do not have the same values that we have. They do not pray to the same deities that we pray to. They do not have the same culture and customs and beliefs that we have. In many ways, it's almost the opposite. So when somebody comes from that society here, there's a period of time that one would have to adjust to that new society, in the same way as if somebody from here in America went to their country, they'd have to adjust to their society. The only problem is, and we know from the various texts and the scriptures that this Islamic faith follows, is they have no intent of blending in with Western society. They're only here to conquer. They're only here to continue to spread Islam. And they're not going to have it any other way. So this court document that's here, it's the Muslim Brotherhood Strategic Plan for America, says the following is the official document from a 1991 meeting which outlines the Muslim Brotherhood strategic goals for North America. This document was entered as evidence in the 2008 Holy Land Terror Funding Trial. Federal investigators found this document in the house of Ismail El-Abasso, founder of the Dar al-Hiraj Mosque in Falls Church, Virginia, during a 2004 search. El-Basse was the member of the Palestine Committee, which the Muslim Brotherhood had created to support Hamas in the United States. If you go through this document, and there's a lot of great information in here, we have here first in one language, and then if you go through to the end, after the Arabic language, it's going to be in English. But you'll see things in here of the indoctrination plan. The way they were going to indoctrinate was to go into the schools to indoctrinate the kids to this belief. And that is why when these kids are coming out of school, they're very sympathetic to this idea of Islam. They're very against anybody who wants to speak out against the atrocities that have been committed by Islam for so many years. Now, does it mean that everybody who's part of the Islamic faith is bad? Probably not. Because to say everybody or all really doesn't make sense, because everybody is an individual. And somebody could have a different feeling about something, but you're part of a society. You have to go along to get along in many ways. And so maybe that's what's happening. But for the most part, when we read the words of what Muhammad is about, what about the agenda is about, it's about conquest. It's about going in and enslaving people, indoctrinating them to your beliefs, and just keeping that oppression going. Not something that really is great in our society. Here's another document. It's the 30-year plan to control America. Has 6 years to go. Now, these 6 years would have come to an end at the end of Hillary Clinton's first term, which means Hillary Clinton was going to be the final piece of the puzzle, the final nail in the coffin for America to go down. We would have been taken over. Thank goodness we didn't go down that path. And hopefully we're going to see some justice coming to fruition here. But read these documents, not to be scared, but to be aware of what was going on behind the scenes. Another indoctrination source comes to us from some official agencies. The World Health Organization says another reason to ditch the World Health Organization is its shocking sex propaganda for kids. Okay, we can see these agendas that are being pushed out there in the world by this organization and others that think young kids should be sexualized. But that's not right. Young kids should be young kids. They shouldn't be introduced to all of these various concepts of homosexuality, of transgenderism, of fluidity in their gender. They shouldn't, none of that. A kid should be a kid. But we have parents in our society that, in my opinion, aren't really thinking very clearly, that are putting their kids through agendas and in situations which really are bordering on child abuse. Hopefully this actions maybe can be fixed so people don't behave such ways, but we need to pay attention to these organizations. We need to pay attention to the agendas that are going on. The social networks are a source of indoctrination. Here we have a company called In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel, from the dot-com boom to the age of AI, In-Q-Tel has been scouting revolutionary tech tools to help the intelligence and the defense communities keep our nation safe. See how we've innovated over the last 25 years amidst a rapidly changing technology landscape. This is a company who put funding into Facebook. Okay, they help fund startup companies that are connected to the intelligence community. And here you could see a number of different organizations that are involved. And if you just simply go down this list, you'll see names here of companies that are out there in the computer realms, and you'll see companies that are out there that are well connected into these organizations. They're startup companies, and when you have like Mark Zuckerberg goes in front of a committee and they say, Mark, are you stealing information from people? And Mark says, no, he's not. He's able to say that with a straight face because he isn't. It's one of these third-party organizations that is also funded by the same groups that fund CIA projects that is getting the information. And as you can see through these lists, there's 8 pages of companies that are involved. So there's a lot of companies that form the backbone of the social networks and the computer world out there that are funded by the intelligence communities in an effort to gather information on you, me, and everybody else. Now, ultimately, if we want to use the technology that's out there because it makes our life simple, we need to be able to share this information. The problem shouldn't be with needing to share. It should be with the integrity of the person that it's being shared with. At the companies, and that's the problem. Guy like Mark Zuckerberg doesn't seem to have the integrity that we think he should have, and we keep having conversations with him about the misuse of our information. The same with Google, same with Twitter. It all is the same story. When they misuse the information, it's not good. So we want them to come correct. Another way that people get indoctrinated and fooled is through people themselves. We fool ourselves and participate in the fooling. Crisis actor. Crisis actor is a trained actor, a role player, a volunteer, or other person engaged to portray a disaster victim during emergency drills to train first responders such as police, firefighters, or EMS personnel. Crisis actors are used to create high-fidelity simulations or disasters in order to allow first responders to practice their skills and help emergency services organizations to prepare and train in realistic scenarios as part of a full-scale disaster exercises. One last here is Crisis Cast. This is a place if you want to be a crisis actor where you can go and sign up. It says we dramatize events for emerging security needs in the UK, Middle East, and worldwide. Our specialist role-play actors, many with security clearance, are trained by behavioral psychologists and rigorously rehearsed in criminal and victim behavior to help police, the army, the emergency services, hospitals, schools, local authorities, government, private security firms, shopping centers, airports, big business, criminal justice departments, media, and the military to simulate incident environments for life-saving procedures. You can go and be a crisis actor, and you can participate in these drills that take place. But then when you go, what you want to watch out for is to see if somebody's filming that, because oftentimes someone will come to these drills, film a portion of it, and then they play it on the news as if it's real. And that's how we get these events. And that's how the confusion plays itself out. And that's how some people at an event know what's going on and others are completely clueless, because it only takes a small group to push an agenda, and you can have a lot of confusion with everybody else who's not part of it but is subject to what is happening. So that kind of gives us a whole well-rounded story of the deep state. Okay? So we see how the deep state took over. They took over in 1871 with when we became a corporation. They took over our media in 1921, and they continued to push that. In the 50s, they applied much more psychological operations to the media and the agendas that they were pushing. They started using more mind control techniques, using devices that put out colors and sounds and blinking lights and everything, kind of like all the televisions and the cell phones we have these days. And then they eventually legalized this propaganda in the American people. So people don't know what really is going on, because between all of that propaganda and then all the indoctrination that we do as we grow up, we find ourselves in the position we're in now, where we're trying to understand what's taking place. But if we're only looking at the day-to-day events, we really can't understand it. We have to step back, take like a 40,000-foot view, so to speak, so we can look at the big, big picture to see what's going on out there, because there's years worth of information, years worth of dots that need to be connected in order to be able to understand this. So it's not such a simple thing. It's not such an easy thing to say in this day and age, that what is being told by the media is what's going on. Because I've shown you many examples, and I've shown you and led you to many places that will show you and confirm otherwise. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go through all of those links and just find the ones and find the trail that you want to follow and start following it. And just learn where it leads. Learn what's going on. And as you do, as you begin to pull that curtain back more and more, and you understand the influence that had been occurring for a long time, you'll start to feel a little bit more comfort because you're not so confused. And once you're in that place where you've got your logical mind going and you're not in that place of confusion, now you could start to see your way out of the problem. But you can't see your way out of the problem until you first acknowledge that there's a problem and find out who are the people causing the problem, who are the enemies, and who are the allies. Those are all things that are important, and those are the challenges we have in this day and age.